the question was, yesterday I spoke about when you die, you go into the astral world, then you have the opportunity to choose your next birth. And this gentleman, whose name is? Michael, Archangel Michael, asked the question, like, first of all, he asked, how do I know this? Which is a very, very good question. You should never take anybody's word for it without at least asking. Second is just the idea that karma is so complicated. How can we choose in any way that's sensible? And then, so we come up with the divine computer that has it all stored in there, which is actually the Akashic record. I mean, long before there was the idea of computers, there was the Akashic record, which I'll speak about all of that now. First of all, I'm a combination of a little bit of direct perception and a lot of intuition, I should say, and some intuition, and a lot of faith in my teachers. And it all sort of, roils around. So at this point in my life, I can't tell the difference. There's a certain point of learning. Again, I had the unique experience of having a direct teacher who was one generation away from Yogananda. So when I came to Swami Kriyananda, I had from intuition, not from experience at that point, the recognition of the perception of his consciousness as being what I wanted to become. And I began what was really my whole life to test that theory. And so there's a certain point when you know someone well, when you have enough experience, that even if you can't verify every single thing that they've said, you become convinced that fundamentally they know more than you do. So at least this is speaking of myself, I was very loath to reject anything he said. That does not mean on any level that I mindlessly accepted. Swami Kriyananda described his own relationship with Yogananda. He said for the same reason. Instantly when he read Yogananda's book, Autobiography of a Yogi, when he met Yogananda, and in their very first meeting, the first words Swami Kriyananda said to him were, "I want to be your disciple." And Yogananda's response was to initiate him as a disciple, to pledge to him his unconditional love, and ask for Kriyananda's unconditional love in return, and also made him a monk, and that was his whole life at that point. He said, "I accepted Yogananda unhesitatingly, but not unquestioningly," which is exactly the balance point. Yesterday I was talking about what it means to be a disciple, which is one understands the limit of one's own understanding and becomes interested, genuinely interested, in expanding one's awareness and one's appreciation. But you can't be a good disciple if the obedience is unquestioning. Because what grows in you has to be on a solid foundation of your actual understanding, not a hope that if I just cower over here, I'll be protected. If you just cower over here, you will be protected in a certain way. But the more you have made this your own, the more dynamic that relationship is. In fact, in the Yogananda talking about discipleship, I'll just touch this here, Yogananda made the statement that the highest form of love is friendship, because every other form of love, including mother love, which is considered to be the most selfless, because literally the mother sacrifices her own body to make the life of the child, has some element in it of compulsion, because there's a form to it. I am your mother, I am your father, you are my child, you are my wife, my husband. There's some element where expectation comes into it, which is not necessarily going to destroy the relationship, it's just a fact. Friend is entirely freely chosen, and the form of it is entirely determined by the reality of the parties in it. But friend also, to quote Jesus from the Bible, he says, "You call me master, I call you friend." So the master himself is asking the disciples to rise to that level. He said, a servant will carry out the duties that the master gives him and will carry them out with his whole heart. But the servant's consciousness always belongs in his village, meaning I have another home. He said, but a friend embraces whatever the concerns and the responsibilities of his friend are, as if they were his own. So this is what we're looking for, and I was a disciple, am a disciple. And of course, the same with Yogananda, whom I knew through Kriyananda, but also through my own heart. It's just, if I don't agree, the chances are that the statistical probability is that they're right and I'm not. At the same time, I have to have it translated into something that makes sense to me. So I walk this balance line of I don't reject, but I don't accept until I can fully accept it. I'm too aware to reject, and I'm too honest to accept without knowing. And nowadays, they're just asking about the astral world. You don't have to go to the saints and the masters. You just have to go to any popular journal, because so many people, because of our medical world, they die and they come back. They're dying and coming back all over the place. And they're reporting a story that is remarkably similar to what the masters and the ancients have been telling us. And these people have no, I mean, if it was one or two from one part of the world or another, or a certain class of people, but all people are having these experiences. Some of them are also going to hell. Those stories are not as popular, but it does happen because you go into the vibration when you take off your body. Now see, I'm speaking authoritatively, but I think this has to be the part that's called intuition. Intuition balanced with a very open mind to understand. It's also extremely consistent. It just makes sense to me. It's like we're always ourselves. Once you even accept the smallest idea that consciousness continues and that we merely inhabit this body, we don't become it. Just the same as I wear these clothes and I take off these clothes and put on my pajamas. When I put on my pajamas, I'm not somebody else. I'm just me wearing my pajamas. And so it is, I'm me wearing this particular body. And I've had enough experience of meditation, occasionally of dreams, and of, what would I say, of being in the company of highly evolved souls, especially Swami Kriyananda, where I can feel that these things are true. Don't take my word for it, though. I'm just giving you that I can't say more than that. I've never had a near-death experience, none of those things. But it makes sense to me, and it's consistent with everything else I know, what I know about the chakras, what I know about how karma works, what I see in other people's lives. It's just like from the time that I was 19 and I first was introduced to this, I have always acted, what would life be like if this were true? When I first heard about karma and reincarnation as an example, there was zero in my upbringing to have me believe it, but I accepted it right away. Now I know, because this is not my first life as a yogi. You don't have a life like I've had if you're just starting. You know, this amuses me, but people say, well, you know, you're a very old soul, and that's considered to be a compliment. That just means you have been taking a long time to learn. You've been reincarnating again and again. What is wrong with you? You know, but I have been reincarnating again and again. Of course, we all have. I mean, I am not different than you. It's just that perhaps I'm I have less of a tolerance for pain, and then more of a determination to learn. Now, about how it works. Karma, reincarnation, and the chakra system have to be understood together, because none of them make sense by themselves. The chakra system, as I have learned it from Yogananda and Kriyananda, I'm not wise enough to know how it's presented to you. If you're interested in the way I put it, and the way they have put it, on my YouTube channel, if you just go in and type the word chakras into the question box. The essence of it is, karma is a vibration of consciousness. We are on this progression from complete delusion, meaning having no idea what's going on, to God realization, where we are infinite and omnipotent and omnipresent and all of those things that are free. That's what these masters are. And all of these masters used to be just like us, because we all are of the same divine substance. Yogananda said he remembers his individual spirit, the word is jiva in Sanskrit, He remembers himself as a unique spark of divinity, the jiva, all the way back to the level of being a diamond. I mean, amazing. Swami Kriyananda once said that the crystals, the gemstones, is the transition point from unconscious to conscious. Which this to me is just like amazingly intriguing. I tried to get Swami to talk to me about it once more, but he basically said, what would you do with that information? Just like, it was just curiosity. I just held my ground, but what I actually asked him was, how long does it take to get from being a diamond to a God-realized master? I also was curious, is like, what do you become after you're a diamond? Is an emerald more advanced, But he answered me by saying, all time is short compared to eternity, which is very interesting. But what we are at any moment, including right now, we are a vibration of consciousness somewhere on this spectrum between complete delusion and complete freedom. We're not, however, one consistent form. We have many different elements within us that all exist simultaneously. They are vrittis, is the Sanskrit word, which means whirlpool. And each of the chakras represents a certain vibration. Every chakra has a positive expression and a negative expression. First chakra, I mean, this is going to be a very short summary. First chakra is the earth, represents security. Security is a natural necessity for living. We have to have some basis for planting ourselves. So we either, the limiting, and I won't even use the word negative, the limiting expression of the first chakra is, I'm going to have a house, and I'm going to have money, and I'm going to have relationship, and I'm going to have a family, and I'm going to have all these things because I need security, and I'm going to make myself secure in this world. And then a fire will come, or an earthquake, or a war, or something. Maybe not in the first incarnation, maybe not for 100 incarnations, but eventually you will realize that there is no security there. So then we start asking, well, what form of security would endure? And that form of security we begin to understand is divine law, divine truth, my relationship with the divine. Because even all those things that I gather are all dependent on my staying in this body. I'm sure it was a joke, but an insurance company offered, you could go in and you could will your worldly goods to yourself in your next incarnation. Was it a scam or a joke? I'm not sure, but I loved it. And that's the way you can do it, they used to, fill your tomb up with gold and jewels and things like that. But it's useless. As soon as you're out of the material world, none of this is accessible to you and even less meaningful to you. So we find security on another level. But everything that we have a commitment to creates a seed point around which energy whirls. You just think about it. Maybe let's think of a positive desire, which so many people have. I want to be loved. I want to be loved by one particular person in one particular way. This is how God has made us. We all have that desire. And so you have a center point there. And then think of all the time you think about that. Think of all the decisions that you make around that thought. And these are not necessarily bad. These are just the things that you do. You create from that center point, you create this huge energy. But and that energy remains even when the circumstances change, and it's planted in your chakras. So when we go to the astral world, the chakras are the astral spine. We have the physical spine, but the chakras are the astral spine. So when we go to the astral world, that's why you're still exactly yourself, because this material manifestation is a manifestation of that energy pattern. So you just step into your energy pattern. Because in that universe, so I'm told, there's no material manifestation, just a vibration of energy. Now all of creation is just a vibration of energy. So and energy attracts and repels. So we're vibrating with all of these magnetic fields of attraction and repulsion, and all of those magnetic fields are our karma, because they are commitments that we have other than the commitment to the one reality. And that means that we still need to have those experiences so that we can understand that all I've ever been seeking is oneness with my Creator again. But we don't know it. So that is how the magnetic honesty of the thing it takes place. It doesn't take human agency to translate those into ones and twos and dots and dashes or however the computers work. It just operates that way because this is an energy universe. So the question then of who makes the decision is also extremely an important question. The entire confusion, I think, in the New Testament is because Jesus uses a personal pronoun. He says, I. And when I speak of I'm starting with this physical body that I'm in. I mean, this is what I think of as Asha. She's in this body. And whenever any one of you uses I or me or mine, we're starting with this limited definition. Jesus was not limited by his physical body. This, as I was saying this yesterday, I believe. He inhabited it. He identified with it because it's the one he was in. But when he said I, he meant the infinite consciousness. And so when he says I in the Bible, people think he means Jesus in the body. But he meant I. I and my Father are one. Did he actually mean that his physical body was the same as the infinite? Well, clearly it wasn't. It died, for heaven's sakes. But he didn't. And then he made folly of the idea that he died by just walking out of the tomb again, completely untouched. For 40 days he walked around with his disciples. So when I say, you decide, I decide, we have basically 3 levels of consciousness within us. We have the subconscious, and this is not exactly psychologically meant. The subconscious is the collection of everything that we've already experienced. It's not creative. It can reassemble what's out there, but it's what we have already accomplished. The conscious is how we relate to the objective reality, and the superconscious is the part of us that connects to the infinite. And when we're out of our physical bodies, when we're in the astral world making that decision, it's really good news. It's not the limited egoic self that makes that decision. If we did, we'd all incarnate, well, I was going to say in Hawaii, but we might just incarnate in the Bahamas. I say Hawaii because Hawaii, before the white man got there, was, nobody had to work. You just ate the coconuts off the tree and the fish out of the sea, and you didn't need shelter and you didn't need clothes. Sort of like Swami Kriyananda said, it's sort of like not quite coming out of the astral world, And that might be what we'd all choose. But the superconscious is the part of us that knows where true happiness lies, and that we must learn these lessons of happiness and suffering. And so it actually makes the choice for us in cooperation with our master, with our guardian angels, with who knows what wise friends and counselors we have on that side. So it's not an ego-based decision. Ego in the sense of limited identification. The superconscious guides us. You don't have to accept any of this as true. So what I recommend is the technique that I used for many years until I stopped needing to prove it, which is, let's assume that this is true. Let's conduct the scientific experiment. How would my life and the life of the people around me and the society I'm living in, would it make more sense if all of this were true? And would it give me a more dynamic and helpful way to relate to the world around me? Is it a more practical way to think? And from my experience, it's proven to be infinitely better. In fact, this is how I would describe Swami Kriyananda's influence on my life. He's just a fixed point of understanding, that allows me to measure other things instead of just like I felt before, which is I was using my reasonably intelligent mind, but I was just making it up. I was just, maybe this is true, maybe that's true. But when you align yourself with a lineage of spirituality that you have come to trust, then all of a sudden, everything begins to shift. because you say, this is how I generally work it. It's like, even if I've never heard Swami or Master say anything specific on this point, what principles do I know that would apply to what I'm trying to understand now? And getting those principles really clear in my mind has been the difference between, I used to describe myself as the puck in the ice hockey game of life, which is a lot was happening. I was sailing from one end of that arena to the other all the time, but I never knew why or what or why they were cheering or booing or where the next hit would come from. I wasn't suffering, but I never had the foggiest idea what I was doing or what life was about. And then all of a sudden, I saw an example, and I've tried to mold my reality to that ever since. So it's that. And as for the record, yes, the ancients speak of the Akashic record. The Akashic is the infinite space, or I can't remember the exact definition, in which they say, all the energy patterns are imprinted there. They never go away. And so in fact, and there's many psychic people who literally speak of it, like the book, and they'll consult the Akashic record and then tell you your past lives and your future lives, and some of them with remarkable accuracy. So what can I say? Okay? Certainly, Michael. Okay, is there another one? Excellent question. Question is, knowing that Kriyananda recognized Yogananda instantaneously or immediately, I had the same experience with Kriyananda. How does that work? Why does that happen? Then the question also is, what about the master who isn't in the body? How do we understand all of this? All very good. Swami Kriyananda wrote an autobiography. It's called The New Path. The first half is his search for truth, and the second half is his life with Yogananda. It's a very interesting book. He wrote it in the mid-70s. I was working as his secretary. It was the last book he wrote before there was a word processor computer. So I actually was his manuscript typist. I typed that book. He was a very conscientious editor. I must have typed that book 50 times. Yeah. Anyway, but as a result. So there was a point when we were actually in Hawaii. He and as another woman and I went there to finish the first half of that book. It was very important to him. He was presenting himself as a disciple of Yogananda. It was a very important book. So I was typing, for perhaps the 70th time, the chapter in which he reads autobiography, goes to New York, is accepted immediately. I said, because by then I was working in our meditation retreat and I was meeting lots of people. I was starting to do exactly what I still do. I said, Swamiji, this doesn't happen to anyone. I said, this story is really unhelpful because I know that most people come to a gradual recognition of where they belong. And many people really never have that certainty. So when you present it like I found my guru just in a minute, I said, it's really not going to be helpful because people will think if that doesn't happen to them, then they don't have a path. Exactly. Swami said to me, I understand. He said, I know it's not helpful. It's not what I would write. He said, but it is the way it happened and it's the truth and I have to tell it. But he was concerned for the same reason. I unfortunately have repeated the pattern. Swami Kriyananda walked into a room. I was about as far away from him as I am from this back wall. I'd never seen him before. A friend of mine had spoken highly of him. I'd never seen him before. Before he spoke a word, I said, he has what I want. Just like that. And I never changed my mind, not for a second in almost 50 years of association with him. It's unfortunate that it happened that way because I know that's not how it happens for most people. So it's very misleading to think if I don't fall in love in the first 30 seconds, then I have to keep searching. Because most of the time, there's layers just many different layers within us that have to gradually be penetrated before our intuition is clear enough for us to know. And also, nowadays, when I was growing up, spiritually speaking, there were a tremendous number of really extraordinary teachers on the planet. There's not as many now. A lot of that whole tribe has gone somewhere else. We have, the descendants of, we're several generations down, but even still, you come into an ashram like this one, it's not always possible for you to appraise the consciousness of the people who have responsibility and who are defining the energy, because we don't have that consciousness. So how do we measure someone else's consciousness? It can't be done. So we have to think of it in other ways. This is the first thing I would recommend. When you come into an ashram, if you've never met Sivananda or Swami Vishnudevananda, but you have many individuals here who either knew them or have been practicing this path, attuning themselves to what I would call this particular ray of grace, because that's what you're working with, because it's like they're different colors in a stained glass window, and the same sun is shining through all of them, but depending on the color, it comes out and it looks like it's different, but it isn't different. It's just the window through which it's coming. But because we're all so different, some of us like blue and some of us like orange. It's just the colors are different, but it's the sunlight that's really empowering us. And when you see people who have dedicated themselves to practicing the teaching, and I don't mean the really nice guy or the beautiful woman who just walked in yesterday, I mean the people who have really dedicated themselves, you can evaluate and understand them much more easily because you have more access to them and they're closer to our own experience. If you want to be like them, if you feel at home with them, if the way they express themselves is how you would like to express yourself, you're in tune with the path. And so you look around and see if this is your family in a very real sense. This is the question that was asked of Jesus. How can you tell a true prophet from a false one? And Jesus said, by their fruits you shall know them. A good tree gives good fruit. A bad tree gives bad fruit. Now, I'm not even talking about good or bad. It's just that you may like persimmons more than you like apricots. And so if you see around you a lot of persimmon trees, then that would be where you would belong. Now, another part of that, though, is we often can't tell what's really right for us because our own intuition is clouded by likes and dislikes and fears and longings. That I want to have a home. I'm afraid I'm not going to have a home. I like it here, but what will my wife say? Or what will my mother say? Or what will it do to my job? Or, all these different questions which conflict with a pure sense of something. It'll get battered about by all these other aspects of ourselves. When I actually moved to Ananda, and I mean, this part of the story is so old, it's not actually relevant except now. I was very devoted to Sri Ramakrishna. And I felt that Sri Ramakrishna had really taken care of me for the 3 years from when I met him before I met Swami. And I had no relationship with Yogananda. I had his autobiography, which is a great book, I highly recommend. I'd never read it, more than a few pages, because it was very devotional. It was very Divine Mother oriented, and it was full of miracles. And I was a very austere intellectual, and so I didn't really care for his book. And then I met Swami Kriyananda. I took it off the shelf, and I thought it was wonderful. And I don't know who changed in between, but somehow when I got the feeling of Kriyananda, I also had the feeling of Yogananda. However, I had this really heart loyalty to Ramakrishna, and I wanted to be faithful, But there was no life for me with Ramakrishna. I couldn't and didn't want to join their monastery, and there was nothing else available. So I come to Ananda. My relationship with Swami Kriyananda is absolutely irrefutable. He could have been in an igloo in Alaska, and I would have gone and sat in that igloo. And I hate winter. But I would have done it. But he was not the guru. He was a representative of Yogananda. So I remember just right at the beginning, I said, this is what I knew. The reason I can't tell is because I don't have the intuition to know. Right. If I do nothing and wait to have the intuition, I will never have the intuition because I'm doing nothing to develop my intuition. But if I act sincerely, as if it were clear to me, then my intuition will develop. And these masters are not, like, they're not keeping score. It's like when someone gets a hold of one disciple, they hold on to it and, write it up. I have more than you. I mean, it's ludicrous. Yogananda and Ramakrishna are just talking about how many Californians, follow them. It's just nuts. So I knew that it was a true path that I was on, and I knew that I had to follow Swami because that was the one thing I did know. And I remember just meditating, and I sort of pulled Yogananda up on one side and I pulled Ramakrishna up on the other, and I said, how would I know? You guys figure it out. And I just really never thought about it after that because I followed what I did know, and I wasn't concerned about what I didn't know because I knew I was in the presence of truth and it would treat me right. There was magnetic honesty to it. And about a year and a half after I was resident in the community, I woke up one morning and said, Asha, how could you belong to Kriyananda like this without also belonging to Yogananda? I mean, come on. And then that was the end of it. But I never would have figured that out if I hadn't started following what I did know. So if you're not sure, just find something that's true to you, that feels true enough to you, and practice. Experience will be your teacher and it will change you. As for the question of these masters not being with us anymore, this is a very practical thought I had once. I'll start from Edgar Cayce is a very well-known psychic reader from the 30s and the 40s. He was also a very devoted follower of Jesus. He was a very saintly man with this very strange ability to go into trance and read people's lives and past lives and future lives. And he often met people in the 1940s who had been disciples of Jesus all 2,000 years ago. And one particularly vivid story, this woman came to him and he read her past life, and he read this life where she was on the street of Jerusalem and Jesus went by. And Jesus turned and he looked at her right in the eye like that. They didn't speak, but there was like this. Then he walked on. In that lifetime, she never did anything more. But Cayce told her, every single lifetime in the last 2,000 years has been you working on the energy that Jesus gave you at that point, and you're gradually rising to be able to really change your life accordingly. So, that's the first part of it. Relationships with masters like this do not just spring full-blown out of nowhere. They build very slowly as we gradually get more and more capable. It's not their unwillingness to give their energy to us, it's our capacity to receive that energy, to open ourselves with enough courage and to work out enough of those conflicting vortices of karma that energy can come into us. If we're vibrating in one way and the master is vibrating in another, it simply doesn't work. That's part of it. We cannot necessarily finish the grace that we receive in one incarnation in that incarnation because it begins to move energy, but we may need a lot more time basically to rise to the next level. But in that also, think of this. These masters reincarnate periodically. Yogananda talked about various of his past lives. Other masters will sometimes talk about who they were in previous incarnations. And the number of times, however, that an avatar comes into this world is many fewer than the number of times that his disciples come into the world. I need many more incarnations. They don't need any incarnations. They just reappear. This is what the Gita says. Whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I, the infinite spirit, take visible form. And that's, Krishna and Buddha and Rama and Ramakrishna, and I believe Yogananda and Sivananda was certainly a great master. All of these, they just come every so often. That means we're going to have a lot of incarnations when they're not here. We're going to have a lot of lifetimes in which our connection has no physical form, that we receive it only vibrationally. And if we come in and we say, well, Shivananda's not in the body anymore, I'm just going to go look for somebody else. And then we're with that person, and then the next incarnation, well, so-and-so's not in the body anymore, I'm going to go look for someone else. We're entirely missing the point. We're defining something that is beyond time, space, and physical limitation as if it were trapped within time and space. We see this very, very vividly in the life of Christ. And Christ, the life of Jesus, when we started, 50 years ago with meditation, most Christians thought we were going to the devil. Nowadays, there's Christian meditation, which makes people who love Jesus more secure. I don't care what they call it. It's all the same thing. The irony of it is that there is no more guru-oriented religion in the world than Christianity. It is absolutely the most guru-centric. It's 100% about the guru, which I'm all for. I have a tremendous inner relationship with Jesus. He's very constant in my life. But you hear the stories of Jesus, Saint Francis, Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint Clare, Saint Augustine, just all these, Padre Pio, who just died in the early 80s, this extraordinary Catholic priest in this remote area of Italy, extraordinary. And Jesus is absolutely alive to them, and we don't think it odd that they've chosen as their guru someone who's, quote, not in the body anymore. We just sort of accept that. So why is it different? And Jesus lived in them because he's manifest. Sivananda is as much present, Yogananda is as much present right now as he ever was in the body. Kriyananda actually said to us once, he said, you're lucky that you never met Yogananda when he was in the body, which is like not the thing that we would normally think. He said, because it was so confusing. He said, I knew that my guru was God himself, but he was in the next room having dinner. And he said the confusion between his human personality and his human actions compared to the sense of his divinity, he said it wasn't easy to reconcile that. And those of us who came afterwards, we only know him as an inner spirit, which is really who he is. The body and the personality are completely superficial. And then the last point is very simple. If it were better for you to be there when the source of your inspiration was in the body, guess what? You would have been. Or you will be. Yeah, or you will be. Or you were. But now this is the assignment that you're given. And part of that assignment is to understand that personality and body and all of that it's not what makes it true. Yogananda, he put it bluntly, in the place where his headquarters was, it was this rural canyon. He said, there are lots of rats and mice in this canyon, and none of them are growing spiritually. What he meant was proximity is not the same as attunement. Yeah. And so we think that I would be more in tune if I were proximate. However, if that's an actual word, I just made that up. But if the truth is, it is not always, because also we can make up Yogananda's personality. We can make up Shivananda's personality. We don't have the inconvenience of them contradicting us. I lived for years with Swami Kriyananda, and trust me, not everybody liked him. And that sometimes the way they would read him was just remarkable to me. But that's how they read him. Because he had a personality, a very pronounced and strong personality. Some masters are completely goofy, because they just want you to feel it from the inside. All right? Okay, good question. The question is, how can you learn to trust your intuition? So much of science refutes the very idea of intuition. Okay, this very good question, and to really explore it, because of the time constraints here, go to my YouTube channel, type into the question box intuition and inner guidance, because I've talked about this for a long time because it's extremely important. This relates directly to my talking to Michael about the 3 levels of consciousness. I have this microphone in my hand. It's a little hard to say, but the subconscious mind is entirely subjective, which is to say when you're asleep, for example, you can have magnificent dreams. And the person who's sleeping next to you can be very active in your dreams. But when you wake up, the person sleeping next to you knows nothing about it. It was a huge experience, but it's entirely subjective. Mental imbalance moves us into an entirely subjective world. Someone who's paranoid, for example. Why did you look at me like that? I didn't look at you anyway at all. Yes, you did. I know you did. And it's very real to the person who's caught in that realm. That's what the subconscious, it's a subjective reality. The conscious level is more objective, which is we can share it more. Like if we all go out of this room and we talk about where we were, we'll generally know, if you remember, that we were in this hall. Some of you will speak vividly of paintings on the wall or deities on the altar. Others of you will have no idea that they were there. Someone else will tell you about this answer I gave to a certain subject, and someone else will disagree about what I actually said, but we'll all know that we were basically here. This is the conscious level where we share it more. The superconscious level, if you think of a funnel that is turned upside down. See, we tend to think that our ego self in our physical body at this time is the apex of who we are, and we stand and defend it, my right to be myself. This is actually the most contracted aspect of our consciousness. It's the funnel turned downward. We're the tiny little point at the bottom, and we have all this consciousness above us, and the funnel actually opens out like this, but it opens out infinitely. The superconscious is what connects us to the infinite. And it's an individual consciousness. It's related to this jiva. These are the things that I believe to be true without being able to tell you exactly why. We have the individual spark of divinity is unique. That's why Yogananda could remember being the diamond. Even when that diamond rose to the level of understanding its true nature to be infinite, the wave is not separate from the ocean. The wave existed, but it was never separate from the ocean. And so superconscious is when we touch the unifying level of reality. It's, if you put it like this, when we live in subconscious and conscious, we're separate. You look across and we're clearly separate. But the source of this is one entity, just one entity. And it's from that superconscious level that intuition arises. Because when you're in the superconscious, I would call it, let me phrase it differently, superconscious intuition is the kind of intuition that doesn't fail you because it's perceiving reality as it is. Its perception is not limited by the egoic identification with this single form in which we depend on the senses for our information. But once we identify with our greater self and simultaneously disidentify with our limited self, then our perception is very different. I am not at all scientific in my brain. It just doesn't go that way. I have friends who are. A friend of mine wrote a book called, very good book, called The Physics of God. And he goes through it scientifically to explain exactly what I just said to you, because he's a student of these teachings too, and he has, these days, the scientists are coming back to exactly the same thing. There is a point in which everything is unified, and I think I can't know about the avalanche because I'm over here, I'm in another country, I'm in the hotel, I'm not on the mountain, because I'm identified with where I am. Break that identification. That's what you're doing when we're meditating all the time. Break that identification, and then you perceive reality not through the senses, but directly. However and what exactly that means. And the greatest scientists do not refute intuition, because they also know that you suddenly just know something. That's what Albert Einstein said. He perceived the nature of reality, which became the theory of relativity. He didn't work his way up to it. He saw it because it was there to see. And his mind was not limited by this small universe. He just saw it. And time doesn't exist on that level, nor does distance. So you could be heading for the mountain to go skiing on the day the avalanche is going to come, and for no reason related to your conscious mind, you suddenly move into the realm where everything is united and time doesn't count, and you know that you shouldn't be on that mountain. And you're not. I mean, there's countless examples of this. And it's just small-mindedness that causes people to not understand what they don't understand. But the times are changing, and the energy is shifting. Now, there's one last point about this, though, because while we're talking about it, superconscious intuition is not, let me say it like this. We have many voices within us. We have those many different vrittis. We have those many different likes and dislikes and fears. So the first step, I'll use the word toward inner guidance. The first step toward inner guidance is to find out what you really think and feel inside yourself. Where are my values? Who do I think I am? Am I still the product of what has been fed into me by my society, by my teachers, by my parents? And so if my life is not even my own on the most fundamental level, I'm just doing what other people have told me is the right thing to do, the first step is to find out just what is going on inside of you. You know, no, I don't like eggs for breakfast. I want to eat granola. I'm sorry if my mother always fed me eggs and told me I had to eat them. I want granola. That is not a very big decision, but it's the beginning of internalizing our understanding. So when we're beginning to sort of understand how to live from inside, from inner guidance, we often follow subconscious intuition, which is not really connected to the infinite at all. And this is where the whole question of inner guidance gets just a little bit dicey, because I feel that this is true. And your feeling may be completely accurate, but it's not necessarily uplifting. It's like, you know, I know in a past life, for example, let's say, you're not remembering it, but you have a vritti because this person betrayed you really badly. And so you don't like them. But when you meet in this incarnation, you don't remember that. And now this person may have totally changed and absolutely repented of whatever it was that they did to you, but the vritti is still in you. And so they come and you don't like them. You don't trust them at all. Or you have a strong vritti that everybody betrays you. And you have some poor loving soul who's trying to tell you, I'm not going to do that, but I feel that you will. And your feeling is true. It's just not necessarily related to the objective reality that you're dealing with. But first, you have to know what you feel. Then secondly, you have to ask yourself, on what level is that feeling coming from? Because the highest intuition doesn't shout. It whispers. And so we have to work slowly to distinguish between mere subconscious promptings and genuine intuitive, superconscious intuitive perception. That's why I have lots of classes about this, because it's very tricky. But it's true. And I'm sure all of you have had those experiences. There's times when you just know. And most of the time, and this is also important, merely because superconscious intuition transcends the rational, logical process does not mean the more irrational it is, the more superconscious it is. I mean, common sense must also be used. And people, again, also misuse the idea of intuition and do, with all due respect, harebrained things just because they're not finishing the process. You know, Einstein spent 10 years, apparently, doing the math to prove the theory of relativity, because he perceived it, but he also knew it could be brought down to a reasonable level. because if it was as above, so below, he could make it work until he got to the point where he could communicate it, instead of just saying, well, I know because I have intuition, which is the very nature of intuition is that it transcends egoic identification. So if intuition becomes an element of your egoic identification, you are in trouble. That doesn't mean you can't say that I trust my intuition. I know. But Swami Kriyananda had more right than anyone I've ever known to claim divine intuition. I have to think about this. I cannot think of a time when he actually did that. He would say, this seems like a good idea, what do you think? You know, and he had a clear perception. But also, in one particular circumstance, it was a very important decision, and there was a group of us, and he said, I don't know, I can't make this decision, you make it. And it was a big deal, and we all sort of chimed in, and afterwards I said, how could you possibly turn that decision over to us? He said, well, I'd already made up my mind as to what ought to happen, but I wanted to see if any of you would think of something I hadn't thought of. I mean, that's how humbly he approached it. And what happened was we all confirmed from our perspective what he also felt to be true, but he never presumed, never. Because presumption is the egoic identification with it, and it becomes the opposite. Okay. The question is, Eva's speaking of being extremely sensitive, trying to tune into the oneness of it all, and feeling that oneness come over, and then having fear stop the experience. When I had some little tiny thing happen to me in meditation, and I went to Swamiji. I was very early in this. I said, you know, such and so happened, and this and this. I don't even remember what the experience was. And very sweetly he said, don't be afraid. And I said, I'm not afraid. Yeah, right? It was like, whoa, where did that come from? So you are a step ahead to realize what the obstacle is. My friend, fear is everything. The fact that, every delusion starts with fear. Really reflect on that. So the fact that you start to move into an unknown realm and you become insecure in that, it's like, that's not a failing. That's just a fact. What you're coming up against is you're coming up against the edge of who you think you are and all the different levels that are threatened by change. You know, change is the only certainty in life, and most people are uncomfortable with change. We want to stay where we are. This is a human example, because often this is how it works. I didn't have a passport till I was 34 years old, I think. I never traveled, then all of a sudden I started traveling. I always had this tremendous fear of being in some foreign country. I only speak English, I'm very limited in that way, where I would accidentally violate the customs of the country and all the people would start screaming at me. I don't know if they would actually put me in a boiling pot and eat me, but that was sort of how I felt about it. It actually happened in Greece, like about the middle of the night in Athens. A friend of mine that I was traveling with, the taxi driver was running up the fare, and my friend was absolutely not going to allow that to happen. So rather than just pay it, he started fighting with the taxi driver. And it was the middle of the night in the square in Athens, and he starts screaming at us in Greek, and pretty soon there's a whole lot of other people screaming at us in Greek. You know, I'm standing right, here it is, here's my terror. Just to finish it, the taxi driver, my friend wore glasses. Taxi driver walked over, took off my friend's prescription glasses, got in his taxi, and locked the door holding the glasses. I said to my friend, we have lost, pay the taxi driver. But what I'm talking about is expanded realms is a foreign country. It's a culture and a language that we don't actually know. And we're just not at home there yet. And this is what Swami, when he said, don't be afraid, he said, you'll get used to it. That was his exact words. You'll get used to it, and then it'll be more or less normal to you. Now, how quickly you'll get used to it depends on what the root point of that anxiety is. It may be, okay, I have a karmic familiarity with mental unbalance. I've not been unbalanced in this lifetime, but I understand it. When I see people who are unbalanced, it makes sense to me, and I can watch my own mind going there. So I recognize that it makes me nervous. I don't think about being physically sick or being poisoned or anything like that, but I have friends who worry about that. We have all different samskars, all different past lives. Maybe, and this is just supposition, this is not intuition, but what you described could be true. Maybe in past lives, when you allowed yourself to express like that, maybe it had terrible consequences for you. Maybe you became egoic and reached a high state and then fell from it. You could say any number of things that would account for the fear, that would be more specific than just this is unfamiliar territory. So in the moment when the force is with you, it's probably not possible for you to unravel it at that time. So you need to practice. You just need to practice the inclination to feel anxious when things are not as they usually are. Because any big issue in our life generally also has a lot of little threads all over the place. And usually you can't get at the big one, but you have to hollow it out from the inside. Like the chocolate Easter bunnies, that look like they're so solid, but they're empty inside, and then you can poke through it. So you have to ask yourself, in perfectly calm moments, what is it that I fear? What is it that I'm afraid of? And the actual answer to all of this is you have to have a relationship with the divine consciousness. Because you are out of control in that situation. If you just try to carry your control into that world, you'll never be able to enter, because this I does not translate into that world. So we have to practice when it's easier. How do I solve my anxiety all the time? Do I just strengthen myself, or do I lean in and surrender to the divine? This is why I'm always talking about Divine Mother, because that, for me, that's a place I feel safe. And I, of course, think about Swamiji, and I think about Yogananda. I feel safe. When I'm beyond myself, I practice attuning to their consciousness and surrendering to their wisdom, which makes me feel like it's okay, I can go forward. Just like this. My travel companion in Greece was a very experienced traveler, and one of the ways I learned to feel more comfortable was traveling with him, because he just knew how to operate where I didn't know how to operate. But inwardly, the masters are perfectly at home in this world. And you just hold your Divine Mother's hand. You become really little. Just, okay, we're going to go. So even when you're thinking as you're walking down the beach, about all these Vedantic principles, don't go there alone. Bring Divine Mother with you. I know the Advaita that we've been listening to is not exactly the same as the bhakti that I'm talking about, but nonetheless, they come together beautifully in the end. So when you're afraid, ask your mother to help you. That's what little children do, don't they? Yeah, just ask your mother to help you. And it'll pass. I'll quote Swami Kriyananda. You'll get used to it. Okay? All right. Okay, the question is about friendship, and the question is, I spoke of friendship just a few minutes ago as the highest form of love. Master said that, Yogananda said that. And somehow I used the word expectations. That was a misspoke on my part. Let me phrase it differently. The word expectations in the context of a yoga ashram is so loaded. It's just such a loaded word that I want to take it off the table, okay? Because it would take me longer than I have to really work with that. What Yogananda really said is that there's a form to other relationships. If the mother doesn't take care of the child will die. If the mother doesn't want to take care of the child, that's too bad. The child will die. Husbands and wives, partners often begin to fall into the thought, well, I have to take care of you after all, because You're the mother of my children. You're the father of my children. So there's all these external things that get set up that become part of the definition of how you relate to each other. That does not have to diminish the quality of your love for each other, but it can. But even in the midst of all those relationships, if you think of the primary tie between you as friendship, we're here because we want to be here. We're here because we respect and want to support one another. I'm here to help you, not with what I need, but what is important to you. Now, of course, that's a very high bar. That's why Yogananda said that. It's the highest form of love. Because when you're truly friends, you know, and people give birth to children. The children are so adorable and loving. And sometimes, after the raising of the children is over, the parents and the children discover that they're actually friends. But sometimes, when the raising is over, they realize that we're not really friends. You know, there's a biological relationship, a familial relationship, and you may have been a wonderful parent, but when there's no form to our relationship now, there's also not necessarily any substance to it. So, and on the other hand, you may turn out that your grown children are your friends still, and that's a great blessing when that comes. So, but it's not possible for us to be utterly unconditional in our friendships, because we're just not that advanced. You know, you have what you aspire to, and then you have to also be very realistic about who I am. I'm just not that good. But it's not so much where you are now. We can't help where we are now. We've had all these incarnations, and we're a car going 100 miles an hour down the freeway, and we recognize that that was my exit, you know, but we have to then make a big turn in order to get there. So we have all this momentum, which is our karma, the magnetism that we have, and we know where we're trying to go, but it moves slowly. So we have to, it's a very delicate balance. I've never seen it work to be at war with yourself, ever. I've never seen it work to say, oh, I'm so bad, I'm so stupid. I used to spend all my energy, Swami told me this, it took me about 15 years even to know what he was saying. Because I would do something wrong and I would just torture myself. I would feel so guilty and I would feel so everythingness. And he said, very sweetly, you use so much energy feeling guilty that you have no energy left to actually change. And I just went, what, you know? But very slowly as I came out of that, I began to understand what he means. So the fact that we're imperfect, oh, like big surprise, you know, and the fact that we have enormous vulnerabilities that are always coming forward, big deal. A friend of mine did something fairly stupid, although I don't remember what it was, and it caused Swami Kriyananda some public chaos. Took him a little bit of time to straighten out whatever mess she'd made. I blotted it all out now. About 2 weeks later, she was still kind of moping around. And Swami said, you know, what's wrong with you? Oh, she said, I feel so badly for, you know, the problem that I caused. He said, how egoic. Now she rebelled. She said, I'm not proud, I'm ashamed of myself, you know. He said that you would be so surprised that you made a mistake that 2 weeks later you're still worshiping it. And he said, of course you made a mistake. Like, would we be on this planet if we weren't going to make mistakes? So you have to say, yes, this is what I did, and no, it wasn't the best thing in the world. But to then worship that, and then always, oh, I'm so terrible, it's so awful, you know, forget it. You're just going in circles. And it's a vritti in your spine. A friend of mine who is she's so free. This is Kirtani, for those of you who know her. She's just so free. And this was many years ago, I will say. I said, oh, I did something and I just feel so badly about it. She said, why? It just took me a minute to even hear what she said. Because to me it was self-evident. Because I think I'm perfect. And now all of a sudden I found out I wasn't. And this is like a major tragedy that has to be just blown up into everything. Why? Like that. So friendship is the highest form, but we have many other relationships that we have to work through, and we just inch our way toward it. But if we don't know where we're going, we'll never get there. Okay?